Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Big Nickel IDP Podcast. I am your host, Jon Macri, fantasy analyst at PFF. In the middle of June, with nothing much going on in the football world except dudes in shorts making plays that only matter for like a day, there's no better time to prognosticate and dive into some of the potential changes to expect for a number of NFL defenses this coming season, with plenty of new defensive play callers across the league. I'm very excited to get into this stuff, and I have the perfect guest to help me through it. The one and only Tom Kislingbury is here, so let's get it.
Dude, I always forget just how Larry that music is, which is brilliant. So thanks, John. Appreciate the intro, dude. Great to be on here talking football with you, man.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the intro. And yeah, we get the video now for the YouTube as well. It makes it look even more spiffy, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I'm excited to have you on. Like I said at the top, we're here to get kind of real football nerdy about it today, talking about the potential defensive schemes and their changes and how they'll impact our precious IDPs, and who better, obviously, to help me sort through it than you yourself, Tom. And you obviously put together like an essential piece of IDP content that looks at a ton of this stuff in your annual defensive handbook. So I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your insights and your knowledge. But yeah, how have you been doing? How's your offseason been?
Really good, thanks. I mean, just talking about the handbook now, honestly, it feels like a lifetime ago. So I basically do that in January into February, and that feels like forever ago. And it's like I probably finished it, 4.5, 5 months ago, something like that. But the feeling when you're doing January stuff, when you're knackered from the season and you've got so much stuff right in the front of your head, and it's cold and rainy and horrible and everyone's miserable, compared to the feeling now where it's stupid hot and everything's boiling and I've got windows open. I'm drinking this much water every 2 hours to try and keep cool. It's a very different part of your life. So yeah, it's going to be good. Mainly we look at football now and you go, I can't face putting a helmet on and running around. That just sounds like the worst nightmare.
Right.
Obviously, I'm not in Canada. It's still minus 40 degrees there, and you're picking out the hail and killing elk.
Of course, yeah, we're still sliding around on ice over here, playing hockey in the streets, and no, it's actually been it's been fairly nice weather. Obviously, aside from like the smoke stuff from the fires over in Ottawa, but not too bad anymore. But yeah, still we got some nice weather that usually lasts for like a couple months. It's not like it's definitely not a long summer here.
Casual racism in football. So I forgot about this. A week ago, I did a panel at work on about prejudice in the sports world, and I was sitting there as the only middle-aged white guy from the home counties. So the person who's experienced the least prejudice in the world. And actually, I haven't in the American football world for a long time. Certainly, when I got started, people were like, "What do you know? You're a Brit," and all this sort of stuff, and that's gone away. And here I am throwing shade at your wonderful nation of Canada. So I apologize.
All good. I completely understand. It's fun to make fun of Canada, to be honest. So I'm okay with
you should see my nephew's hairdos in Montreal. Wow, they're bad.
Oh yeah, they're real.
You can probably see them from where you are. They're pretty.
Oh
impressive.
Wow. All right, fair enough.
All right, we should talk about football.
We could get into it. I mean, we got a lot of like defensive play caller changes. This happens every year, right? Across the league. So we won't get into like every single one of them today, but we'll cover at least a few of the teams that we expect maybe some of the bigger shifts from in tendencies at least, and at least the ones that are more interesting to us. So we'll talk about all the IDPs, obviously, that could be affected by this, maybe positively or negatively, and then based on that information, you guys, the listeners, can then decide if you'll feel they'll be worth investing in for the 2023 fantasy season. So let's start it off with one of the more drastic shifts in defensive scheme for this coming season, the Minnesota Vikings. So they brought in Brian Flores as their new defensive coordinator. He served as the defensive assistant and linebackers coach for the Steelers last season. But prior to that, he was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins from 2019 to 2021, where we saw a vastly different defense than what the Vikings have been running in previous years. So this one should be interesting. I find it really fascinating. What do you think about Brian Flores heading to Minnesota first?
Yeah, torn. Obviously they made a change last year, and the defense wasn't great. Flores is a really interesting guy, right? And he's the best place to start when you're talking about scheme change, because this is the most drastic change in scheme and required personnel in the NFL this year. I would say in quite a distance. And we can talk about personnel usage and things like that, but just every unit of the team, you look at what the Vikes have been doing. You know, it was only like 2-3 years ago that Zimmerman was there with his old-fashioned, a few years out of date defense, and really, really straight 4-3 defense.
Yeah.
And now suddenly we're there with Flores, who runs sort of hybrid fronts, doesn't really like using a classic middle linebacker. You know, middle linebackers are basically 260-pound guys who rush the A gap. Quite into sort of hybrid. I want to say Sam. I mean, you know better than me that Sam is not really a position in the NFL anymore, but Sam edge, and then he goes to this really man-heavy corner scheme, which is pretty opposite of the zone as they've been using. And the safety is going to play in a different way. So we could talk about the interior guys, right? So in my mind, Flores comes from the New England and Alabama school, where they generally play left and right defensive tackles when they're in even fronts, obviously. And they're basically identikit, really big square dudes. So rather than the concept that we fans normally have of a 3-tech and a nose tackle and never the twain shall meet, they don't really look like that. So you don't look at them and go, which is the guy that's the pass rusher? You go at them and go, it's so difficult to predict. So from my mind, that defense looks different at every single level, and it's going to be a nightmare to predict. What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, it is. It's definitely one that I think is going to be completely different. The one thing, well, not one thing. There's a lot of things that stand out. You touched on them a little bit here. I'll pull it up for the YouTube crowd because it's probably a fair bit of numbers. But one of the main things was, just in how he utilized his linebackers. Right, the LB2 on when he was with the Dolphins was far from an every down role, right? You look at some of the usage here, 56% of the snaps on a weekly average was the LB2 in Miami, which is a big difference from last year in Minnesota, where it was 80.5% of those defensive snaps. So he does tend to lean a little bit more into spreading the usage out across linebackers, a little bit more tendency to use like a third or fourth linebacker on the depth chart in place of the second one. There's not really like a true LB2 or secondary linebacker. He likes to kind of switch it up, right? And then the other thing that stood out, like you said, is that man heavy defense, right? And we know for IDP purposes, we want more zone coverages, at least for linebacker tackling, because it allows linebackers to yield a better tackle efficiency. That's been proven. We've pulled those numbers every year, and they're consistent. Man-heavy defenses tend to yield a lower tackle efficiency for linebackers, and actually below average for the position. So that is a bit concerning for a guy like Brian Asamoa, for example. So not to kind of yuck the yum of Brian Asamoa enthusiasts or anything like that, but he is somebody that I think a lot of people are kind of expecting maybe a breakout season from him going into 2023. But as much as it's a better opportunity than last year as a rookie, where he only played like 121 snaps, I'd be pretty shocked if he was the primary linebacker ahead of Jordan Hicks. And if he's not, then I have a hard time imagining him playing anywhere close to a full-time role. You add in that man-heavy, blitz-heavy defensive scheme as well. It's just not really the kind of recipe for success that we're looking for in an IDP linebacker. So he could definitely outperform expectations on any given week, and people will yell at me, but doing it consistently throughout the year, I'd kind of be concerned about him finishing within like a top 36 or 40 IDP linebackers, maybe even top 50 if we really want to get spicy with it. I'm just not feeling the same kind of love for like a Brian Asamoa this year that it seems quite a few people are.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've got Asamoa as the clear number 2 linebacker there, and you've just shown the numbers, which my logic's based on as well. He's just not going to play that much, so I've got him down playing about 700 snaps, which used to sound really impressive in the 16 game season. In a 17 game season, it's less and less impressive. So I've got my LB 58 at the moment now. The standard deviation that is probably 25 spots each way. So, things will happen and stuff happen. But I was just thinking this when you were talking about him, obviously people are going to like him because people love everyone on IDP. Minnesota drafting linebackers, right? Here we go. From Anthony Barr back in 2014, Eric Kendricks, brilliant. That works out. And then Edmund Robinson was a 7th rounder, but IDP people liked him. Kentrell Brothers, remember him? Elijah Lee, Devontae Downs, Cameron Smith, Troy Dye, Brian Cole, Chaz Surratt, Brian Asamoa. Every year it's like, we're going to get another day 2, early day 3, and people are like, he's going to be the guy, and it just doesn't happen. They just hang around, and then the pros do that. So look, he is a really good coach. Flores knows his onions. He's been around the NFL. He's a very good defensive coach, and I think, I'm not sure I can prove this, but I think he's going to favor the vet that gets it done. And everybody who's not a vet who can really get it done is a long shot. And sure, one of them might pay off, but we're gambling, and I don't like gambling.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like Jordan Hicks the best of that group. I don't love him for IDP overall because of the defense. So I'm picking him to, kind of win that job and be the starter there. He's been there. Obviously, the experience is key for the linebacker position. And I agree with you. I think Flores will depend on that as well. And I would be surprised if Asamoa outsnaps him. I know, things can happen. Or Hicks could be released or traded, whatever, get injured. There's a lot of things that can happen, but as it stands right now, I have it Hicks and then Asamoa by a pretty big distance as far as rankings go. But the other thing that was interesting about Flores' scheme was, and you mentioned this as well, that kind of single high defensive system, a lot of, cover one. So it allows that one safety to kind of come down and play a little bit more in the box. We saw that with Brandon Jones. It made him a decent IDP.
Yeah, absolute banger.
Yeah, he was awesome. And so there's potentially a spot for somebody like that in Minnesota. I'll be interested to see who you think it is, but I think Harrison Smith kind of makes the most sense for me, just being one of the better tacklers at the safety position, right? Somebody that you could rely on to support run defense. So I think he could potentially kind of come down at, it's a higher defensive back blitz rate with Flores as well. So he's had some success as a blitzer, not a ton, but even as a guy that's getting older, I think he could have some value in IDP this year, more so than he's even had in years past. And I'll be interested to see how they kind of utilize their DBs and their safeties, because we could even potentially see more 3 safety looks as well, right? As he kind of leans into more dime personnel, right?
That's a league trend. So if you bet pretty much every coach in the NFL is probably going to have a few more snaps with 3 safeties and 1 linebacker on the field, you're probably going to be right, because it's a copycat league. So a couple of things I want to talk about safety. One, we should talk about that blitz rate. And you're right, he does blitz as defensive backs. He loves blitzing safety, but so much of that came from that one game against the Ravens, right? Yeah. So you remember that? When was it? 2021 in week 11. Yeah, and the Dolphins went, Lamar Jackson's tearing up the league. What are we going to do? We're just going to blitz him on the safeties like every single snap. And so many people in IDP in particular looked at the numbers of pressures and sacks and went, wow, Javon Holland is a really big blitzing defensive back, because that one game where he blitzed 35 times from memory or something like that just piled up so many numbers on a seasonal basis. It looked really high. So that there are still people that think he has 2 blitzing safeties and they sort of play interchangeably. And you're right. You mentioned this before. That's not true. He's a single high guy. Javon Holland played for the vast majority of his career under Flores as a single high guy. That's who he is as a player. But there's a bit of game planning flexibility there. Obviously, for someone who comes under Belichick, I'm mostly with you. We've talked about Harrison Smith before, right? He's had a great career, brilliant player. Flexibility. I like nothing more in the NFL than a flexible safety who can play in every phase of the game. But he's not as young as he used to be. And, that hits hard for me because I'm old. You look at Harrison Smith now and go, with the difficulties of that defensive scheme and his age, you probably want to go, look, do something really well instead
Mhm.
of try and do everything. It doesn't mean every play, it doesn't mean every game, but I mostly agree with you. If someone's going to be that box specialist, it looks like him.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. And I mean, this is also a team, they spent a first round pick on Lewis Seen last year.
Yeah.
So he
How's
got
that
hurt.
working out?
Yeah, he unfortunately got injured. So I think, depending on how Harrison Smith looks, I know there was talks about him potentially leaving the team this year, retiring or whatever. He did resign for a year. Cam Bynum was reliable for them last year. So if Smith does have difficulty holding up in that role, I think maybe Lewis Seen could potentially be an option there as well in those three safety looks. It just kind of depends. We'll see how that goes as the season shakes out. But yeah, just to kind of go into the year, if I had to bet on somebody to be the best IDP version for the Viking safeties, it's Harrison Smith again for me.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about where you draft him.
Sure.
If he's the 10th defensive back sitting there, are you probably not even thinking about him at that point, right?
I don't
Or
think
10th
so. I don't.
safety, we should say.
Yeah, I don't think I would, only because I know I probably don't need to. I know,
That's
like,
fine.
if he's at the top of my queue, I could probably pass on him and grab another position, because most people, they don't like old guys.
Right?
They just they're right.
Yeah,
Everybody
he's going to
wants
sit there.
kind of new and younger, exciting safety. But yeah, these guys, Harrison Smith recently in recent years, anyways, has consistently fallen to the later rounds of drafts that I've been. So I'm fine with kind of waiting on him. He could be my second safety if I need it, and I'll probably get him at a decent value, I think.
I've got him lower than that. I mean, the actual rank he's coming out at the moment looks a little bit low, so I'm not
Mhm.
that happy with it. But honestly, I think he'll be outside the top 40 sitting there,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
that massive bank of people. So out of all of those, you want to gamble on someone who could have a
Mhm.
full-time box role, right? And it's a gamble. We're not sure about it. We've just said that, but
Yeah.
those are the sort of picks you want to be making after
Yeah.
the first 40 safeties are off the board.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that he's a kind of the perfect candidate. Like, if you're fading the position, which you really should be doing when you're drafting your IDPs, is waiting on the defensive backs. He's kind of the perfect guy that, there's a lot of them really, but yeah, he's a great bet to potentially surpasses his IDP price tag at the moment.
Yeah, can we talk about the edges a little bit? Because
Sure.
I think that's really interesting on here, just in terms of personnel. So, scheme wise, sort of doesn't matter too much because they're just going to pin their ears back and they'll be rushing the passer anyway. And there's that clear top three guys, right? We've got Hunter, although rumors have been swirling around him for a while.
Mhm.
You got Davenport, they brought in as a reclamation project. Remember when the Saints traded 2 firsts for him? Yeah.
2 firsts. Yep.
And then you've got DJ Wanham. I saw someone talking about DJ Wanham the other day as a breakout. He's so bad.
Yeah,
But
he's
yeah, he's a decent number 3 edge rusher in the NFL, but he's not very good in IDP, where you sort of want top 24 guys, and he's not
yeah.
that. They're in that order for me, and the only
Mhm.
one I really trust is Hunter. Are you in the same place?
Yeah. Hunter's the clear one for me. I don't mind taking a shot on Davenport, just because I think he's another guy that people are just really down on. But I think
Yep.
the opportunity is going to be there. I think a lot of his, kind of underlying pass rush metrics were pretty strong. Not as much last year as they were the year before, but still decent for a number 2 edge defender on a team where you can get him like pretty easily after the top 36 edge guys are off the board. I'd say you might even get him into the top 50 or so.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm fine with kind of taking a shot on Hunter as like a late flyer, as a depth piece that could potentially fill in on bye weeks or things like that. But I'm not interested in DJ Wanham. I just think there's more talented players to to bet on, who again, if Hunter doesn't get traded or released, the opportunity for me is just not worth it to bet on somebody like that. So
There's more talented players than DJ Wanham that live on my road here in
right.
London.
Shots fired at DJ Wanham.
Yeah, one day I'll come around and knock on my door, and
Yeah, yeah. All right, so that's the Vikings, and we kind of touched on a little bit, obviously Flores being in Miami, so I think it's natural we talk about the Miami Dolphins here, and go into Vic Fangio, who is their new defensive coordinator,
Mm.
previously with the Denver Broncos. Is that right? Yeah, Denver Broncos and the Bears before that. So let's talk about Fangio here in Miami, because maybe not as drastic of a shift from Minnesota to Miami or Minnesota's for Flores switch, but still decently big changes here. What do you think about Fangio heading to Miami?
I look really interested. Obviously, Fangio is a big name. He's got a load of love, and he's been quite rightly heralded as one of the fathers of the current sort of defensive system that is trending across the NFL. So, big fan of him. Was he worth paying a record fee for a defensive coordinator? I'm not totally sure, but I hope to be proven wrong. The interesting thing here is going to be the safeties again, right? So from Fangio, we expect that sort of classic too high left and right safety rather than a strong safety and a free safety. That's not really what he is at all. But we're also looking at it and going, I probably expect there to be two full-time linebackers most of the time. He's pretty old school when it comes to linebacker deployment. So I'm slightly worried about Fangio because he had a really, really good defensive career and he could still be that guy. But all defensive coaches have a shelf life because the NFL changes so much and the hot young things are normally on the offensive side. We get loads of little hot shots who come from college that go, I'm going to do all these crazy things in offense to defeat these old dinosaurs who've been running the same defensive scheme for 10 years and don't change as quickly. That's sort of the history of the NFL. And Vic Fangio looks a little bit like it might be sneaking up. That sort of too high system has been really popular for 3, 4, 5 years. And a lot of it came from him. And he's got a lot of coaches around the NFL. Is he going to come back and be at his best in Miami? I hope so. I'm not sure I'd bet on it.
Right.
But Miami should do well anyway. So, sorry, this is slightly off topic. Miami had a weird thing last year about defensive takeaways, right? They just didn't have any. They played really well. They just happened to not take the ball away. And that's obviously not the sort of thing that happens 2 years in a row as well. So there's a decent chance the Dolphins could be the same or not as good a defense, but look much better on paper.
Sure. And Fangio will get the credit for that, right? So
absolutely.
There is definitely variance in that. Those turnover rates, obviously, offense that you play has a lot to do with that. But I like what you said there. Obviously, the too high thing is going to be one of the bigger differences for the defensive backs. We saw obviously going from the Flores scheme, which was the more single high, going to Fangio, which is much more too high. We're going to see a little bit more. Less of a box roll for a safety. So where this kind of concerns me is for somebody like a Brandon Jones, right? Because even, assuming he's healthy, he's coming off an injury, I don't know that he's the better fit for this defense. And they did bring in Deshaun Elliott, who's fine.
He's a great fit in that. I don't love him as a player, but he's a good fit for that system. So here's the interesting thing, right? You talk about Brandon Jones and you look at here and we go, we probably expect two mostly full-time linebackers. Jerome Baker hasn't been that guy since the very start of his career in the NFL. He's been playing more and more on the edge. And a lot of people love David Long. Fine, let's say that. And then we're expecting two high safeties, which is not Javon Holland, it's not Brandon Jones. Do you look at Brandon Jones and go, is he more of what we would call a linebacker in the NFL, but might be a pure box safety, and it's sort of the same thing?
That would be interesting. Yeah, if they started to utilize him, because their linebackers. I think Baker and David Long probably have the best shot to start. But like you said, if they're not comfortable with Jerome Baker, who hasn't really performed well as like an off-ball linebacker, or at least hasn't shown, shown enough of a sample size that he's a capable starting linebacker in that orthodox kind of role. He's very good at blitzing, but kind of inefficient and ineffective as a starting middle linebacker, right? So I think David Long could be interesting. And after that, it's kind of open, right? Channing Tindall, they drafted in the 3rd round. Again, another 3rd round pick guy.
Yeah, one of those guys.
Yeah, so he's there, but Brandon Jones, I really like him as a player. I do. I have a soft spot for Brandon Jones. I think he's a really good IDP. So that would be a lot of fun if they started to utilize Brandon Jones in a linebacker role. That would be definitely something to monitor. And if he's healthy, that'll be a big IDP cheat code because he's probably not going to likely get a positional change before the season either. So
I agree. Well, let's look at the divisional coaches, right? So let's assume for a second that Fangio is lining out Jerome Baker and David Long at linebacker and Brandon Jones and Javon Holland as pretty orthodox left and right safeties. If I'm Bill Belichick or Aaron Rodgers or Josh Allen, I'm going, brilliant. I'm having that because both of those are opportunities for me to create mismatches on.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's
Which doesn't sound great.
Yeah, it's big. It's a big difference. And the one thing for Fangio, at least in what I kind of noticed from the differences between what Miami did last year, is it is a lot less base personnel. So two linebackers is still better than three, I guess, where Miami was like 43% of their snaps last year were in base personnel, which is pretty high for the NFL at this point, where Fangio, I'll pull it back up here on the screen, but 24.9%, a little bit much more nickel. So again, still two linebacker looks, but like you said too, that LB2 role is a little bit more consistent and solidified as well. So 70% of the snaps from what we've seen versus the 59.4 in Miami. So I do like that for whoever does become the LB2 in Miami, whether it's Baker, Long, Tyndall, Brandon Jones, whoever, right? It's kind of at least more consistency and reliability from the position than what we've been used to in the past. So that is interesting.
I'm going to try and do a little screen share here.
Yeah,
see
go
if it
for
works. And it's probably not going to work, so bear with me. But so this is from the handbook. Hopefully this is coming up. If it's not, so this is the way I look at this, right? And this is packages. So 3-2-2-2-2. Is that all the five? Is your basic 3-4 base, right? So according to my numbers, your numbers might be different. It's obviously interpretive. They ran the most 3-4 base in the NFL last year, which is really unusual because the NFL's been moving away for that number of years. But the interesting thing here is if we look up here, that 1-3-1-3-3, which is a big dime defense, right? So 3 safeties, 3 cornerbacks, only 1 interior lineman, 1 linebacker, and 3 edges, i.e. an edge lining up on the inside. It's a real, what we would call a pass rushing unit, but actually it's quite different. That's been becoming more popular, but it's not that similar to a base defense in terms of who's doing what. So the difference in how those two things balance are going to be really interesting, because we would expect Fangio to run more 3-3 secondaries. I certainly would, but way less of that 3-4 base. So how those two things change, I'm looking at.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And that was another thing with Miami too, is they would drop their edges into coverage a little bit more as well, right? We saw that kind of with Jalen Phillips, who I think like 99 like pass down snaps he was dropping into coverage. So that's a pretty big chunk of his pass rushing time, or potential pass rushing time. And for a guy, like Jalen Phillips, who was really good last year, posted a 90.1 pass rush grade just last season, I think turning those coverage snaps from Phillips into pass rush opportunities, it could, be another like force multiplier for his potential to kind of hit big in the sack department, at least in 2023. He's somebody that I have high expectations for this season as well. So that could really help his case as well.
Is there I'm not sure if danger is the word, a similarity there between him and someone like Harold Landry? So we refer to Harold Landry as a pure edge player, right? But he's so flexible and he's so athletic. The Titans have lined him up in the slot quite a bit over the years, and he's played inside linebacker, and he's dropped a middle linebacker, and he's lined up over the A gap, all those sort of things. It's great for a coach if you can do it, but it's not great for IDPs.
Yeah, it definitely takes away that big play potential, obviously, right? And then it might help them a little bit for tackles, but it's not enough to really bet on or actually kind of use as an advantage in any kind of way. So, hopefully with Fangio coming in, we see kind of less of that from Phillips. He's a very athletic player. He's good all around the field. I'm sure that's what they liked about him, for him to drop into coverage, but I don't necessarily kind of love the idea of dropping defensive linemen into coverage. I think it mostly is a recipe for disaster if the quarterback's able to get the ball out quickly, right? It's used in blitz situations, but it's
well, you've been covering rookies, right? And every year we get a bunch of players come to the NFL and we go, oh, he's so flexible, he can do all these different things. You go, sure, but that's bad for IDP. Right. It's really bad. You generally want someone who's going to focus on doing the thing that is most efficient for their given position in racking up points. The more they don't do that and they do a few other things, it's bad. They score less. Stop being excited by it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, look at somebody like Isaiah Simmons last year, right? Who was kind of all over the place. And we'll talk about him later, but yeah, he's kind of the prime example when you think about flexible linebackers, for example.
Right. Jerome Baker, we talked about Carl Van
Jerome
Noy.
Baker.
I have a question on another edge in Miami for you. Bradley Chubb. Where are you in Bradley Chubb? Because a lot of people still really love him, and the Dolphins gave him a lot of money.
Yeah, they paid a lot. I would say they paid too much, obviously, for a guy who's probably not top 32 edge in the league, but they definitely paid him like he was, or paid for him like he was, because they gave
Yep.
up a first
First
and then
round
signed him.
pick.
Yeah, so they gave up a first and signed him to that big contract. I mean, look, I'm all for kind of preaching patience for defensive linemen. Year 5 and 6 is typically where we'll see them really hit their prime. I just worry that he hasn't shown enough to be that confident about. I think he can be solid as an IDP if he's going to get the snaps, if he's going to get the pass rush opportunity. But yeah, I mean, cost comparison to what Miami gave up for him, that's where I can't get on board. I don't think he's worth that.
It's weird, isn't it? So Dolphin fans are obviously excited. So they've got the
Sure.
big new coach, and they're looking at it and go, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb. Both of these are a high first round pick. We've got Emmanuel Ogbo, who's had some good years, blah, blah, blah. And I'm a little bit skeptical. So we just talked about Chubb. Neither of us think he's brilliant. He's fine. He's a decent pro. Emmanuel Ogbo had some really good years, but he's that classic sort of inside-outside player, right? He's really good at playing on the edge and even fronts and playing inside and odd fronts, and he can take on his man and he can win one-on-one. Great. Well, he could at his peak anyway. He didn't do that last year at all. He's still on the roster because his contract is unmovable because Miami, and they hand out terrible contracts all the time. And at best, you're going, he's sort of third choice edge in a role that probably not going to suit him very much under Fangio. That's not great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bummer for Ogba, because I think a lot of people were excited about him. He had some productive years, but then really kind of fell off last year.
Yeah.
So yeah, him, Chubb, maybe somebody kind of emerges there as a decent DE2, but really Jalen Phillips is the only one that I actually kind of like from that group. Obviously, Christian Wilkins on the interior is a nice option in DT required leagues, but outside of that, don't love the defensive line for Miami. So we'll see. We'll see if Fangio can kind of make anything of it, but that is to be determined. So let's go to let's talk about the Saints, because the Saints are kind of interesting as well. They have Joe Woods as their new defensive coordinator. So Woods was the defensive coordinator for the Browns. After Steve Wilkes left in 2019, Woods came in there from 2020 to 2022 last year. So we'll reference maybe his last 2 seasons in Cleveland, at least when I show the chart here for the YouTube crowd. But yeah, Joe Woods coming into the Saints. I mean, the first thing that stands out to me was the Browns linebackers last season or the last couple seasons really were a complete mess to try to sort out and very scary. So I do worry about that for New Orleans a little bit. How about you? What are you thinking about for Joe Woods in New Orleans here?
Oh, well, I wasn't thinking about Browns linebackers, and I'm having JOK flashbacks. So that's terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, I love this graphic you put together here. This is really good. So let's look at the linebacker numbers. Now, for my money, Joe Woods and the Browns over the last 2, even 3 or 4 years have been one of those teams that have experimented quite a lot in non-full-time linebackers. The Bengals are up there. The Patriots have been at times. A few other teams, Chiefs at times and not at times. And I think that's quite a big trend in the NFL as well. I think that some of the cutting-edge defensive coaches are going, why do I need it to be 1974 where I just pick a couple of linebackers and they go out every single snap? Why don't I just put on the right guy for the right sort of play? And the Browns have done that, maybe not brilliantly successfully, and it might not have lit the NFL on fire. But I think Joe Woods was definitely looking at that, and as has been pointed out quite a lot, the number of linebackers on the field you would expect to drop off a bit, right? So he rarely deploys 2 full-time linebackers. He rarely deploys over the last 2 years 1 full-time linebacker.
Right.
Part of that's injury, part of that's rotation, blah, blah, blah. There are various reasons for it. But you look at the linebackers in New Orleans and go, am I really faithful? Have I full confidence in him staying on the field? So what's his name? Super old guy. Can't remember his name.
Demario Davis.
Demario Davis, obviously. You look at him, who's getting on a bit. He's still a good player, still getting paid. But you look at the coach coming in, who's got a known and demonstrable history of putting a third safety on the field and not playing full-time linebackers. And you go, is Davis going to spend a bit more time blitzing, which he's still really, really good at the right moment, and a bit less time plugging the A gap against, flexible plays where you're not quite sure what's going on?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm really concerned about Demario Davis, and I've kind of been lower on him anyways the last couple of years, just because he's been so kind of ineffective as an IDP. At least when he's not putting up sack numbers, his
as a
tackle
tackler,
totals,
yeah,
his tackles have just been abysmal compared to the league average. But 34 years old, heading into what is like 12th NFL season, so you look at the LB1 rates, and it's under 90% for under Woods, right? So I could see them easily kind of taking him off the field a little bit more, and maybe utilizing him in more blitz situations versus as a typical kind of off-ball linebacker. And where I start to worry is guys like Pete Werner, who, is somebody that I like as an IDP, but doesn't necessarily stand out as somebody that you can't take off the field, right? That you cannot afford to remove from the play. So we saw this with JOK last year, right? He was another 2021 second round pick, just like Pete Werner. JOK was coming off the field pretty regularly. Like you said, these teams deploy more kind of situation specific linebackers, right? So they're looking at guys
super interesting.
Yeah, it's reactive to the offense, right? And that's kind of what defense is. But depending on the offensive personnel and look that they put out there, the defense is going to react by putting out different guys as well, right? So we're seeing that a little bit more. We saw it with the Steelers last year. Yeah, we saw it with the Patriots as well. It could be something that we saw, and we did see with the Browns last year, but it could be something that New Orleans starts to employ as well. So I do worry a little bit about Davis and Pete Werner for this season. I'm hopeful for Werner to be the better IDP than Demario Davis, but it's just hope at this point. I don't know how much of it'll actually translate. But
yeah, look, I'm with you, and I've flashed up this image here just on the linebacking tackle efficiency. Oh, that's split across two boxes, sexy. So anyway, the point is, don't worry about it. This pink dot over here on the right hand side, this is all linebackers last year snaps versus tackle, and that pink box is Demario Davis. So pretty inarguably the least efficient tackler in the NFL amongst linebackers. Now he played over 1,100 snaps, so great. It doesn't matter too much, but that's a worry. Now, Pete Werner over here is the blue dot, and people love Pete Werner. They're like, oh, yeah, he's not a full-time player, but they love him so much because he's one of those players that people jumped on in IDP drafts, in rookie dynasty drafts, and they've just stuck with him. And he's put up some points at the right time, and good luck. I hope he does well. But he's not some tackling efficiency is not a thing that lives with players anyway. We know that, but even if it was, he's not one of those guys that has it. So if he plays the volume, cool, he absolutely could do. But you're not going to get him at value because so many people think Pete Werner is their guy.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? He is going to get a lot of hype this year. He missed some time last year with injury and stuff like that, so we didn't get the kind of true, breakout. But I think there's going to again be that hope that he could be the guy this year. Again, he's somebody that I like too. He was somebody I had as a breakout candidate last year, and somebody that I still like for dynasty quite a bit. But for 2023 under Joe Woods, that's where I gotta get concerned a little bit. And we talk about coverages and things like that. The good thing about Woods coming in is that he is maybe implementing potentially some more zone coverages, which could help that tackle efficiency a little bit for guys like Werner and Davis. But we do see that inefficiencies in tackle rate be a little bit more stable than kind of the over efficiency. So it is a little bit concerning for sure. All right, let's go to talked about Joe Woods,
go back to your point of when we?
Oh yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Sorry, dude. A bit of a delay.
I jumped
there
early.
On my end. So I just wanted to raise a point. That's good. Non-full-time linebackers. That sounds really weird and it sounds quite revolutionary, but the NFL has gone through that process for lots of other positions, right? It used to be weird that you took your starting running back off for a snap. It used to be the same for receivers, and it used to be the same for ends. It used to be the same for edge rushers until really, really recently. And all of those positions have gone into more and more of a rotation. And we're seeing it all across the field, apart from maybe cornerbacks and free safety and offensive lineman and quarterback. So it's natural and it's going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely more of a trend, right? And you think about especially them going to like an 18-week regular season, right? And how these guys get injuries, they're banged up throughout the year. It's a very physical game. I mean, the NBA is doing load management for their superstars. The NFL can easily be doing that just on a per snap basis, right? Cutting into their guys' workloads to try to keep them healthy is part of it. But just reacting to offensive situations and having guys for specific situations is. It makes a lot more sense than trying to just leave the same guys on there and hoping for the best, right? So NFL rosters are massive. They're huge. They have a lot of starting players in the lineup every single week. So why not utilize the guys that are best at certain things? So it absolutely makes sense.
We should talk about that turnover as well. So we're comparing last year's defenses to this year coming here as well. And it's worth noting that NFL personnel is like 40% turnover on 40 or 50%, something like that, on rosters. So it's really tempting to go the Vikings defense and the Vikings defense, but that's not really what it is. The movement of players just makes everything way, way less consistent than we think it is.
Yeah, no, that's a good call for sure. Yeah, there's just so much change every year, but that's what makes the offseason fun, right? Is we get to kind of figure out how these guys fit, and that's obviously kind of the purpose of this episode. But the purpose of any time we're talking IDP is all, especially in the offseason, is just trying to figure out what might be this coming season, and we'll be right, we'll be wrong, but the whole thing is to hopefully provide people with the best information, and then they can go from there.
But yeah, I agree. I've increasingly come to think that IDP is about providing a framework. So let people make their decisions, but the real hard work you need to do. Certainly when I started, there wasn't a list anywhere of who all the starting or players were, or reliable depth chart. Depth chart websites are still absolutely terrible. Yeah. But it was really hard to find that stuff. You sort of had to do it all yourself. And now it's just a massive time saver. If the IDP industry can do that for people and go, look, there's still going to be 25% standard deviation and error within that, and that's optimistic, frankly, then that's way better than it used to be.
For sure. Yeah, it's providing people, the pieces of the puzzle, and then they can try to put the puzzle together themselves. Everybody can maybe put it together in different kind of ways, and we'll see which ones work and which ones don't. But I don't know if that's the best analogy, but it's basically trying to put all of this information together to try to create the best, whatever rankings or projections, whatever you want to do for the season. So.
Yeah, with you. Right, which team are we talking about next?
So we covered Joe Woods, obviously formerly with the Browns. Let's go to the Cleveland Browns now, who also have a new defensive coordinator. Jim Schwartz is coming in. So he was just the defensive assistant in Tennessee the last couple years, but last time we saw him as the primary defensive play caller was his time as the defensive coordinator for the Eagles. From 2016 to 2020. So again, for the chart, I'll maybe reference his last two seasons with Philadelphia, just the most recent stuff. But what do we like or don't like about Jim Schwartz going to the Cleveland Browns?
I mean, I love the hire. I'm really excited by it. So we talked earlier about defensive coordinators having their shelf life, and that's probably fairly live here, but it wasn't long ago that Jim Schwartz was arguably the best defensive coordinator in the league and delivering absolutely ferocious, deep pass rush. So I think it's really exciting. You can see there, look at the LBT rate. That's a real giveaway. That's not massively different. So I don't think we're going to see huge shock in terms of what happens there. The man coverage rate is a really interesting one. So definitely Schwartz is more of a leave a man for man outside, let him rush 4, and we rotate that 4 heavily up front and see if we can beat our man one-on-one, which is a bit old-fashioned. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but that's how people used to think 5 years ago, and people are moving away from that sort of coaching. So it doesn't mean he'll be terrible now, but it does mean the NFL has changed a little bit from him at his best. However, I'd still think I think he's a really good coach in terms of getting the most out of his players and making them better. And by his players, I specifically mean defensive linemen. I think we look at the Browns, and certainly I for the last few years have looked at the Browns and gone, yeah, you got Myles Garrett, and he's really, really good. And your second best rusher is Jadeveon Clowney or someone else, or no one that really close. Do you remember? People mostly don't remember the interior line on the Browns last year was just so bad. It was eye-wateringly bad. And there were a couple of recognizable names on this, and people thought they were right, but it was really, really bad. And they just let people run all over them, couldn't do anything. So I look this year and you go, sure, Myles Garrett's still an absolute stud. He's amongst the best defensive players in the NFL. He's absolutely brilliant. But if you've only got one good defensive pass rusher, as opposed to another type of pass rusher, which clearly is a thing, it's relatively easy to coach your way around it, right? I mean, not delete him, because nobody can delete Myles Garrett. He'll beat double teams. But it's much easier than it would be on a different team. So sure, Zadarius Smith is interesting. He was really good last year. I suspect he won't be quite as good, but he's still a really solid player. I'd probably rather him than the Clowney. Ogbo Okoronkwo is a decent player. Alex Wright might show something. The interior has got maybe a bit more optimism around it, but I look at all those guys and go, not sure. I look at them with Jim Schwartz and go, yeah, I bet you can turn that into something pretty decent. And then we get into the linebackers, right? We talked about that before. JOK is just such a joker, forgive the pun intended, but he should be a really good, interesting player. My opinion of JOK is he fits the overhang position more than anything else. And I think we've talked about this before, but probably not a while. And people say the overhang thing isn't a thing in the NFL. It's only in college. I disagree. I think it is a thing in the NFL. There's quite a few players who we would maybe call a safety or a linebacker or someone who plays in the slot, but he sort of combines all those roles. It's pretty much the same thing. I think that's his best position, but that's not a full-time linebacker. So when we go to talk about flexible players earlier and going, just do the thing, playing that sort of role in the NFL is really cool and it's really interesting. It's fun and coaches love it, but it has a lower tackle efficiency than most of the other linebackers. So his ability to post really high weeks and season is going to be limited. And I'm not sure I trust any of those linebackers.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, JOK, I see him kind of being that secondary option in Cleveland, and maybe he plays more that overhang role, like you said. But again, not a full-time role, maybe more dependent on big plays, if anything. But I do think, at least with Schwartz coming in versus Joe Woods, that at least maybe brings a little bit more stability, or what's the word I'm looking for? At least you're able to better predict kind of what the linebacker usage will look each week, where last year it was very kind of unstable. So there's a little bit more stability there, I think. And Anthony Walker is kind of the guy that I tend to target if I am targeting anybody from this Cleveland group, because again, not somebody that costs much. He was injured last year, so a lot of people forget about him. But he was their LB1 to start the season last year. I think he kind of fits that mold a little bit better than anybody else on the team. So I do kind of like him potentially as an IDP for this season. JOK, I'm more optimistic about him than I was at the end of last season, but it's still not enough for me to kind of overpay to try to acquire him or anything like that. So I do think there will be, at least, like I said, maybe more stability from the linebacker, consistency from what to expect each week, basically.
Yeah, I hope you're right. We should talk about Sione Takitaki as well, who's a really interesting player. So, I went straight to JOK going, he plays in the slot. He's that sort of player, blah, blah. Takitaki played in the slot a higher proportion than JOK has. And he has done over his whole NFL career. He looks like that big, wide, squat, big-bodied linebacker. So you assume he's a A-gap banger. And he's really not. He's a really flexible player that can line up across there. And, he's not a full-time player. He's probably closer to that sort of tight end eraser concept a little bit more. He's definitely a bit more flexible rather than your standard linebacker. But you've got him and JOK. And then if you really want to be pretty classy, you look at Anthony Walker, right? He's still on the roster, and you go, he's that guy. He's a much more traditional linebacker. But I don't trust him. I even with someone like Jim Schwartz, I don't trust them to go, Anthony Walker's our guy. We're going to give him 1,100 snaps. It doesn't feel right from an NFL point of view. Yeah. No, I hear you. And basically, I mean, some of the coaching staff is still there, right, from last year. It hasn't been a complete overhaul. So there will still be, I think, that kind of those tendencies from Cleveland last year. It won't be a full Schwartz takeover, I guess, right? So Stefanski
could play a part in that as well. And if he
Yep.
liked that deployment that they had last year, that could still absolutely be a concern for IDP players this season as well for the linebacker group. But yeah.
Can I go slightly left field? Sorry,
Yeah,
last
go
time
for
we
it,
did
go.
a pod, people were like, "Oh yeah, you kept going off on different things," and poor John was struggling to keep up. We're going to do it again. So we briefly talked about this earlier when we were messaging each other. I have come around more and more to this idea that offensively minded head coaches have much more input on defense than we think. And the logic behind that, we'll talk about Kyle Shanahan maybe if we have time for that, is that those guys, those hotshots that we talked about who are changing the NFL with offense, are the best position to go, look, as my offensive principles go around the NFL, I know exactly what I hate going up against and what is really hard. Kyle Shanahan's a brilliant example of this. All the defensive coordinators that have worked for Kyle Shanahan over the last few years, and 2 or 3 have gone on to be head coaches now, have all adopted when they got there and when they're very, very similar principles. And I'm pretty sure that's because Kyle Shanahan, the greatest defensive mind in the NFL for my money, is going, I hate going up against these concepts, and everybody else is nicking my concept. So can we just do that more to everybody else? You know, when he first got to the Niners, it was a very up and down, high, low safety. And then it very quickly morphed to 2 high safety looks as that became more popular. And obviously him and Vay are tight and blah, blah, blah. There's lots of examples of how that's moved around. But I think Stefanski might be another example where he goes, I've got pretty distinctive offensive takes, and I need to make sure that we're erasing that for other offenses that are going to play similarly to us.
I love that. I think it makes a lot of sense because the guys that obviously know what stops their, high powered offense the most are the ones that have seen it be stopped before. They know the kind of defenses that have given them trouble. So it makes sense that you would see some more input on the defensive side from those offensive guys. And I've always kind of liked the idea of having maybe an ex quarterback or somebody like that having like being a defensive assistant or something like that can give insight into what the quarterback is seeing and why it could cause issues and stuff like that. So I don't know how much teams do that. There may be coaches or somebody that listens. I have no idea that might be able to tell me better. But yeah, I really like that idea. I think that's a great call.
I think it happens more than we assume it does. Because we watch Hard Knocks, and in Hard Knocks they go into their little meeting rooms, and there's a defensive room and an offensive room, position rooms, and we sort of don't see that. But we know the coaches sit around and talk, right? We know they're having daily meetings. I mean, this is obvious. It's how organizations work, and it's not like the old days where you'd hire a defensive or an offensive coach and you just hire a grizzled old veteran on the other side there to do it. And we should have talked about in Miami, obviously, who have an ultimate young hotshot offensive head coach and have got a grizzled old defensive coordinator. But those guys aren't going to go, run the defense. I'll see you in February on the cruise ship. They're going, how are we syncing our concept? What does our overall football philosophy look like, and how does that fit with trends around the NFL?
Yeah, very true. And like with Hard Knocks, they don't show you a lot of the strategy meetings, right? They show you the entertaining stuff. So there, it very well could be going on. And you're right, it probably is something that's very common across the league and across all leagues. But yeah, we just don't know how much input that is, basically. So it does make sense that some of these, smarter minds or newer minds to the NFL would start to implement a little bit more of that stuff. So I do like that call. I guess, one more thing that kind of stood out as a player of interest for me for Cleveland under Jim Schwartz, if you're looking for more of those single high coverages that he's kind of deployed over the past, is potentially getting Grant Delpit down towards the line of scrimmage a little bit more. I think he makes sense in that role. This is a guy who just came off 105 tackle season in his first year as a starter. So I think his fantasy stock could potentially either, be even risen under Jim Schwartz as an IDP. So that was the only other thing I think that stood out for me was the Browns safeties.
Yeah, I'm sort of with you. So if we're assuming that Thornhill and Grant Delpit are the top 2 guys, right? Which looks to be a safe bet looking at their roster, and Thornhill Thornhill can play maybe in too high system, but he's not a box safety in any way
Yeah.
whatsoever. So I get your logic of where you got to. Now, I don't think Delpit is a very natural box safety either. I don't think he looks comfortable. I don't think he looks good doing it. But he piled up all those tackles last year, and you can't argue with that. So this might, at this point, just be prejudice and me being wrong.
Sure.
I'm very open to that.
No, you're right. It's possible that they obviously could switch that out too. They could rotate the guys, but yeah, I just looking at the two options. If we're going to see single high looks, I just can't imagine one Thornhill in that role, right? So it's kind of the lesser of two evils, basically. If you had to choose one, I just think Grant Delpit makes a little bit more sense there than a one Thornhill. Yeah. And who knows, maybe they bring somebody else into at some point. But as of now, that safety group is pretty thin, especially with John Johnson being released too. So.
Yeah, whoever got the responsibility for the free rusher on the offense, if they see Thornhill coming at you, they're probably like, I might be a 190-pound scat back, but even I can block that guy.
We'll let Nyheim Hines pick him up or something.
Yeah, he could. I mean, all backs obviously suck at pass blocking. They're absolutely terrible this year. But I reckon he could do a job against Thornhill.
Sure. All right, let's do what do we got here? Yeah, the Carolina Panthers. So Ejiro Evero is the new defensive coordinator. He spent last season as defensive coordinator for the Broncos. Just 1 year of defensive play calling under his belt. But Tom, I know you're a fan, also a fellow Englishman as well, so you love to see that. What do you think about Evero taking over in Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we'll claim him as a fellow Englishman, but I believe he was born in Southend because his parents, or at least one of them, was in the military, and he happened to be stationed here for a few months. But he was born in Southend, and not a lot of good has ever come from Southend, so that's fine. I thought he was a bit unlucky to get moved on last year. I thought he did a decent job, and that was quite an interesting little defense he installed there. And I pour one out as well for the Panthers. I really like what the Panthers tried to do with their defense under Snow and old college guy whose name I can't remember now. Obviously, it didn't work out and the whole team fell apart. But I'm not sure it was their fault. They tried to be quite interesting and distinctive defensively. Just looked up, by the way. I had the Broncos last year as the number 11 ranked defense. So we've talked about good coaches with big reputations that ran far worse defenses than that last year. Number 11, your first year as defensive coordinator, when clearly the problem was the quarterback and everything on that side, getting sacked, that feels really harsh to me. Yeah. So I'm excited. I think he could do an interesting job on that Panthers team. Now, you look at it and there are still massive holes in personnel wise. So that worries me, particularly on the defensive line. So Derek Brown actually had a really good season last year, but he's still not really a money-making interior alignment. And I really, really worry about the edge position. I have done for about 3 years now. Brian Burns is a really fine speed edge rush passer. He does his job, and he does one thing, and he does it really, really well. And after that, I look at that list of edge players, and I go, Yetur Gross-Matos is probably still second on the depth chart, and he's just, A, he's not very good. Yeah. B, he's another one of those inside-outside linemen like Emmanuel Ogbu we talked about. He hasn't really got a full-time position, and he's got one of the weirdest stances in the NFL. So everybody at home, when you're watching him, he gets so low, and his legs are lined up about 5 feet away from each other. So he looks like someone that's trying to cling onto the floor in a hurricane and not get blown away. So yeah, good luck. It's really interesting for him. It's not working. He's not very good at football. And then after him, you got Marquise Haynes, right? He's a journeyman. You got DJ Johnson and Mare Barno, who are both day 2 draft picks, and sure you might get some play later. Yeah, maybe it was 4th or 5th round. Or who knows later than that. Henry Anderson is in the roster. It looks like a big weakness at the moment. So I like Evero, and I wish him all the best. I think he might do a decent coaching job, and I think the personnel might let him down. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think Carolina's probably going to have a bit of a tough time this year, both kind of offense and defense, as they started a new regime, basically a new look offense there under Bryce Young. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, Evero, I mean, I think, as far as what the defense might look like differently, the one thing that kind of stood out to me, Carolina last year.
Strong agree.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they ran no dime, right? Carolina last year, but now they've brought in Von Bell, as an option, and Jeremy Chin's still there. Xavier Woods is still there. So I think with Evero's tendency in Denver last year, it was about league average as far as dime personnel goes, a little bit below, but we could potentially see a little bit more of that under Evero, which would potentially hurt maybe the LB2 on the team, whoever that ends up being, whether it's Shaq Thompson or Frankie Louvu. But I think there's could be a tendency to get all three safeties on the field this season, more so than what they did last season. So we could get a little bit more Von Bell or Jeremy Chin, depending on what they view their roles. Chin, I know, played a lot in the slot last season. We'll see if they can plan to utilize him in the same way, or if they want to use him more in the box as that second linebacker and use Von Bell in the slot. But I think Xavier Woods makes sense as the guy that would play the majority of his snaps deep. But yeah, I'll be curious what you think about the Carolina safety group.
Yeah, that's fascinating data. So I'm going to flash up something really similar. We can compare and contrast because this is what football nerds do. So it might not show up that well. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit. So this is the way I count it. Front linebackers and secondary you can see here. So the key bits here is look at number of linebackers, right? So yeah, that's right in the middle. So here you can go. Last year, the Broncos ran 30% of defensive snaps with only one orthodox linebacker on the field. That doesn't mean the safety is not playing in the box, but one orthodox linebacker, which is double what the NFL average was. So same as your numbers show there, we are going to see way more single linebacker snaps. That's almost inarguable. And then you look over here and you sort of look at what that looks like in the secondary, and actually higher than average base there. So 30% in base secondary with two corners and two safeties. That's fairly unusual to see this year. But then look over here and look at the fronts, right? So this is classic hybrid front. We've got about half the time spent in a four-man front, which is way lower than league average, and about 40% in an odd-man front, and 10% doing other things. So it's a very flexible defense. There's a lot of things that are going to change. I think they're a bad example when you look at a defense like this, and people in July will go, well, here's the 11 starters in one particular formation. And that's absolutely not what it's going to look like at all. This is a very role based defense, and everyone's going to have a very clear thing that they do, and they'll be asked to do things at different times. So really interesting from a coaching point of view. It's really fun going what they do with Von Bell, Jeremy Chin and Xavier Woods. I love that trio of safety. They're all really flexible. So Jeremy Chin has got this reputation as being a box banger, right? But I'm not sure that's what he is. I think he's fairly close to being an overhang guy as well. He's a safety that occasionally lines up deep, but mostly is either in the box or in the slot, depending on what sort of offense and personnel they're up against. But that's not all he can do. Von Bell is mostly a box player. But that's not all he can do. Xavier Woods has played in a bunch of different roles. So you look down the list, right? And you go, Derek Brown is what he is. He's a primarily run-stuffing interior player. Could have a Christian Wilkins season? Well, probably not, because nobody does that, because it's amazing. Right. But he could have depending on your scoring system, he could have a really good year if you have tackle-heavy interior linemen. I like him, but I don't really trust anybody else in that unit at all. We like Brian Burns a lot. He's going to pile up sacks, and he's going to be good. I would probably argue he's not going to rack up many tackles, but, depending on the scoring system, that's great. So you got one there. Linebacker, I'm expecting only one full-time linebacker, and I know Frankie Louvu won you your league and blah, blah, blah when you picked him up for free. Great. But it's Shaq Thompson. Give me Shaq Thompson over Frankie Louvu as that one modern interior linebacker. Sure. Every day of the week and 3 times on Sundays. And then you've got those 3 safeties. And I'm not sure I look at those 3 safeties and go, any of those as a full-time player probably work out. But if I'm the defensive coordinator and I'm looking at who I'm playing that given week, and I may well fancy Bell and Chin, or Chin and Woods, or Woods and Bell in any given week, or probably in most weeks, quite a bit of all 3 of them. Depending who plays in the slot, right? The other thing about whether we see 3 safeties or not is who their top slot defender is. Because increasingly we're seeing teams go, well, a safety is my best slot defender. So we might end up with a load of stuff where we've got 2 cornerbacks on the field, JC Horn, Dante Jackson, who knows, maybe CJ Henderson sort of recovers and brings his career back. But it feels more likely that in nickel secondary, which you're going to see most of the time, you're probably going to have Bell, Chin and Woods on that field, and then a decent chunk of what I would call a 33, a big dime secondary, where you've got those 3 cornerbacks and those 3 safeties, and only Shaq Thompson on there. So really, that was a long-winded way of saying Derek Brown, Brian Burns, and Shaq Thompson I really trust, and everyone else is sort of up in the air a little bit. Good NFL defense. I'm excited to watch it play out. I don't think it's going to be great IDP hunting ground apart from those guys.
Yeah, that's fair. I think, with Chin last year, he played better, or at least he was a better IDP when they used him in the slot. And to your point, you're absolutely right. We're seeing more teams kind of utilize the safety in the nickel position as well, right? We saw with the 49ers putting Jimmy Ward there. The Bucs put Antoine Winfield in that role last season. Jeremy Chin, obviously, in Carolina. So it's definitely, there's other examples as well, but it's something we're seeing a little bit more. So there's a potential for maybe a full-time role for all 3 guys, or close to it, a full-time role. But how much of it do you trust is actually going to come through? We don't know until we start to actually see it on the field. So it's more of like a buyer beware type thing. If expectations are too high for any of these guys, I'd probably kind of reset those and maybe push them down boards a little bit. But yeah, a very good call. I do like that a lot.
We will see that in preseason as well. So whether your top nickel guy is a safety or a corner is generally something that teams show us in limited preseason and probably camp as well. So we should talk about why that happens as well, because it's really easy for us to go, oh yeah, this is a big trend and this is what teams do. We should talk about the reason behind it. So the way I understand it, you're closer to it than me, and your company does this for a living, is increasingly offenses have put big slots and what we laughably call tight ends, who are now just big wide receivers, out there in the slot. So traditionally that wasn't the case, right? The slot receiver was a little speedy guy who could go both ways. So your defender was a little speedy guy who could go both ways, and that's just not the case, because they get bodied by those big dudes who are fast and have got 2 feet on them. So increasingly NFL teams are going, well, rather than me roll out that big safety who can sort of do it every so often, let's just put time and investment and resources into having one of those guys that can handle it most of the time. And then it's unusual if I need a little tiny speedy guy who can go both ways.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the main thing, right? It's absolutely the way more teams are utilizing those tight ends in the slot. The guys, obviously the Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, even Dawson Knox last year was another one that got more usage in the slot. But guys like that, Evan Ingram, TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts, there's a ton of examples on almost every team, right? So it makes sense that you'd want a bigger defender who can move, be mobile, cover to cover these kind of bigger receivers in the slot. So yeah, very good call.
I love it when people talk about offensive play. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm done.
When people talk about offensive players and go, oh, he's a mismatch, like defensive coaches don't see this and don't understand. I mean, do you think they're stupid? No defender can stay with them. Yes, they can. That's called a safety these days. It used to be linebackers are too slow, and safeties and cornerbacks are not big enough. And it's just safety. Safeties are really big, strong, fast guys that line up all over the field.
Yeah, nobody's using Nathan Jerry as a slot linebacker anymore. So it's sorry, Nathan Jerry. All right, let's look at kind of one more team here, maybe more if we want. But let's go to the Arizona Cardinals, because Jonathan Gannon, is coming over as the new head coach from the Eagles, and Nick Rallis is coming with him as the new defensive coordinator. So both guys coming from the Eagles, where Gannon was the defensive coordinator and Rallis was the linebackers coach, if I'm not mistaken. So this is interesting because Arizona last year, their defense was a bit of a mess. I think it could very well be a bit of a mess this year just to sort out. But it at the very least should look a little bit different, maybe potentially in the linebacker usage. But what do you think? I'll let you talk about Arizona here to start off.
They're obviously going to be really bad, right? We should point out at this point, we want the best for all NFL teams. Certainly, we cheer hard for NFL teams who traditionally have not been winning teams and been really successful. So I'd love the Cards to be good, but it seems as obvious it is for any NFL team. They've sort of gutted the roster and they're trying to build it back up again. Right. By the way, I work very closely with a lady called Carly Murray. So when it's football season and people talk about Kyler Murray, it's like
Right.
brain is blown, man. Yeah. So you look at this, and there's not a lot of talent on this defense, right? So Buda Baker, he's been good at times. He's not the player people think he is because of the tackles and IDP. And after him, you go, there's not that much. So cornerback is a massive problem. They haven't had any talent at cornerback for a long time. At the start of last year, I think a couple of them played better than we expected. And of course, people only remember what happened in the first 4 weeks of the season or the last 4 weeks of the season. So people sort of think it's less of a problem. And then the thing we were talking about earlier was where do you put those two guys? So latest info is Zaven Collins drafted at 9th overall as a giant 6'5", 270-pound linebacker. It looks like he's going to be playing on the edge. They've been trading that for a few months, and it's been the case all through the offseason. So we're going to assume it's true. And then Isaiah Simmons, who was also drafted at whatever it was, top 10. Maybe 10, Colin was a little bit later. Let's talk about this. I'll let you explain where PFF are in it, because how you define him as a player last year is pretty controversial.
Right. Yeah, so Isaiah Simmons on PFF.com, he is listed as a cornerback. So I'm just going to pull up his exact numbers here to get the reasoning behind it, because it's based on, I believe, the majority of snaps, or in a combination with where they start in a game. So he played 409 snaps in the slot last year. I'll pull up your positional classification for him as well. So 409, 409 snaps in the slot last year, more than any other alignment on the defense, in a pre-snap alignment, that is, out of 897. So almost half of his snaps were spent in the slot last year. His next closest was the box, 297. The box can be close. Like, there's an invisible line basically between the box and the slot, depending on how you want to look at it. But the way that we have it, he had 297 snaps in the box. So very large part of his snaps were in the slot. And then he even spent some time out wide, which was interesting. 28 snaps as a wide corner. This, to me, you don't really have a choice but if you have to classify him as one position. I know he was previously listed as a linebacker. IDP sites pretty much all have him as a linebacker. I know Sleeper gave him the dual designation with the DB thing, which now makes sense because he absolutely played the majority of his snaps in the slot. So we have him listed as a corner. Probably makes more sense to just call him a defensive back, a general classification like that. But he's a really weird one. So yeah, that's kind of the reasoning behind it, is that he did spend the majority of his snaps in a defensive back position versus a true linebacker position.
Yeah, semi-permeable membranes, right? So I've done this experiment with drawing the box and this sort of idea of what it was. What normally happened in my experience is you go, right, show me where the box is to prove the difference between a linebacker and a strong safety. And what people normally do is draw the box outside the guy they think is a linebacker and in front of the guy they think is a safety. So it's just reinforcing prejudices. And obviously coaches don't really care, right? They don't necessarily think of those in those terms. They're going against a specific offensive personnel package or formation. Who is going to cover which job? And last year, it so happened that we talked about teams maybe not needing the same type of old school slot corner, which is still an oxymoron. And maybe they looked at it and go, look, who's the best guy that can go up against the slot guy? It's Isaiah Simmons. So we're going to put him there. Whether that's true or not is really interesting. So you can make a case that the cards go, well, Zaven Collins is going to be an edge. Isaiah Simmons, for all of his flaws, might be my best linebacker. You can also make the case that he's the best box safety on this team. And you can also make the case that he's a slot corner or a DB or whatever you want to call him. And he should probably do the same thing again. And we just don't know. So we're seeing all these, he's been in this meeting these days and all the stuff from the beat writer, but I'm ignoring that until I see it on the field. I don't know what's going on. We talked about this earlier. Kaiser White looks like the guy. If I'm putting my money on any of these linebackers to be the sole full-time linebacker, and I'm only expecting one maximum on this defense, is probably Kaiser White. Now, I don't know when he's being drafted because he's one of those guys who a lot of people like. He played in the Chargers and everyone loves Chargers. Everyone's got a jersey on their wall behind them and think the Chargers are brilliant, all that stuff. But so you might not be able to get him at value, but he's probably the guy I draft out of those three because I don't really want to touch the others.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, and you know what, from what I've seen, he has been like a decent value, at least doing some like best ball drafts and stuff. I think just betting on, kind of the ambiguity of the situation and buying the cheapest guy. I think Kaiser White between Simmons and Collins has definitely been the cheapest guy. And then who knows what they do? Like you said, if Collins is playing the edge, which, I mean, what is he? He's 6'4", 260 pounds. He's massive. Their lack of edge talent is abundantly clear. Like it's BJ Ojulari, it's Myjai Sanders, Dennis Gardeck, Victor
the Barbarian.
It's Dennis Gardeck, the Barbarian. Yeah, it's obviously it's probably the worst group in the entire NFL for my money. So Collins on the edge.
Look at the interior line as well.
It's
interior. You got Carlos Watkins, Lecky Fotu, Rashard Lawrence, Jonathan Ledbetter.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's
really bad. It's a really bad roster. And let's talk about cornerback whilst we're there as well. Top two cornerbacks we're likely to see Antonio Hamilton and Marco Wilson, who are both awful NFL players. I mean, Garrett Williams is a rookie, second round. He's my friend Max's favorite corner in the draft class. So, shout out to Max. I hope Garrett Williams lands brilliantly. But that's not a lot.
Yeah, it's there's a reason they're the favorite for the number 1 overall pick next year. They're just not looking good. And so, I mean, we've seen, Gannon and the Eagles had success with Hassan Reddick last year as an edge, as an undersized edge, and Zaven Collins is bigger than him, although he doesn't have necessarily the history of being an edge rusher in college. He did a little bit as a blitzer. He had some success at Tulsa the last season that he was there. He had like a 91 pass rush grade and put 15 pressures and 4 sacks, but that was on I think it was like 40 something pass rush snaps or something. So very, very limited sample size. So they're trying him out there. They started early this offseason with calling him an edge and grouping him with the edge defenders. So it seems like they're probably going to at least try it to start the season. The same thing with Collins as the defensive back. So there's room there potentially for somebody else besides Kaiser White, because I'm with you. I think Kaiser White makes the most sense as kind of a typical linebacker in this defense. And then Kyle and I talked about it last episode, talking rookie linebackers. Owen Papo might be worth, a sleeper or a flyer pick at this point as a potential guy. Chris Barnes has had some IDP success before, but the options are super, super thin. It is an abysmal defense at this point. So I'll be interested to see kind of who emerges, because I think there should be some IDP relevancy from whoever comes in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so someone's going to be on the field.
Yeah, it's just a matter of who. But the edge group, I mean, that's a group that I'm probably staying away from.
Yeah, if I'm drafting now, I'm looking at Cardinals who might end up on my team. We talked about Kaiser White, who I could well draft at value. I like that. I'm not touching Buda Baker because he's going to go as top 5 safety, and I don't take top 5 safeties because that's a bad bet. Jalen Thompson will be valued as his best year, not his most recent or his whole career. So he's going to go way higher than I want to touch him. BJ Ojulari, I don't hate in rookie drafts. I've seen him go 6th, 7th round, and at that point, sort of worth it. It's worth a go. So he might be sitting there on my taxi squad, but that's it. I'm not touching any of the others. But just as you said, someone's going to play this now. So I think these are a primary group of players who you're looking at week 1 and all through the season and going, who the hell has got this job at the moment? As they cycle through terrible players and bench them and cut them and pick them up. There's probably going to be some people you chase as a short-term fix at some point, but that doesn't help us in June.
Right. Yeah. And to be fair, I like BJ Ojulari. I like the opportunity maybe more so than the player, especially for this season, right? For rookie drafts and things like that, you take a shot on a guy, but to bet on him kind of hit the ground running and being IDP relevant right away as a rookie is probably a bad bet as well. Right. So, it's just,
I love him just best ball. He's really good at best ball. I think it's really interesting, but the sort of guy that you go, you click on your 2 starters every week, and if you're picking BJ Ojulari, you're probably not going to maximize your points.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be a rough week for you for sure.
He's going to have 6 really good weeks and 0 points in the rest of the season.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. It's gonna be a really rough season for Arizona. I feel bad for them, but hey, that's at least they have the first overall pick potentially coming their way next season, and then I believe they may even have the second overall pick, depending on Houston does. So,
yeah,
uh,
they certainly did a good job of doing that. Oh, sorry, one thing we should talk about there
yeah,
is volume, right? So at this point, some of the listeners are probably going, "Oh yeah, but they're going to be really bad. They'll play loads and loads," and that's not really true. The relationship between being a bad defense and sitting there on the field is nowhere near as clear as people think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at the worst defenses, the teams that played the most last year, you're looking at 1,160 total snaps, something like that, and then average is 1,114.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of 50 snaps over the year.
It doesn't matter.
It's not that big a deal.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not something to use as a strategy or even a tiebreaker in drafts. There's a lot better correlating metrics that you can try to use to your advantage for IDP drafts. But I'm with you, that's definitely not one that I'm paying much attention to. So, yeah, but that's it. We, there's other teams out there that we could cover, but we won't go too long, obviously, because we could cover the entire NFL at this point. But that'll do it for this episode, at least. I had a lot of fun diving into these defensive tendencies with Tom, and I hope you guys did as well, and potentially came away with some information that will give you an edge in your fantasy leagues this season. Like I said, there were a few teams. Yeah, there we go.
Zing.
There it is. So obviously, we didn't cover at the Atlantas and Denvers and Philadelphias of the world, San Francisco, Houston, but they just weren't as interesting or aren't expecting to see as massive shifts, I guess, in tendencies that were worth covering in this episode. But I did write up a bunch of these scheme changes for PFF.com as well. If you're interested in reading into it a bit more, you can check that out now. But a big thank you to the wonderful Tom Kislingbury for taking the time to join me today and dropping a ton of knowledge on us for the pod. I really appreciate it, Tom. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, buddy. It's great talking football with you, and I've had a brilliant afternoon.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time. It is very nice to talk to you. We don't get to talk that often, especially once the season gets going and we get crazy busy, but I appreciate getting to talk to you here. And before you go, please let the people know where they can find you, what you have coming up, and any plans for this season.
Great question. You can find me on the Twitter at Tom Kislingbury, and if you can spell it, then you deserve to find it. I've been pretty quiet in the off season just because a lot of other things going on, but hopefully that'll ramp back up once camp starts. Still putting out the normal things. So if you search through my inline, you can find totally free projections. You can find my free handbook. So if you like some of the graphics and stuff we put up there, you can find that. It's 700 pages or something of pretty deep analysis on all the teams in the NFL. So the point of that is to do intermediate defense. So somewhere between 3-4 or 4-3, and that's it. And being able to dissect Nick Saban's playbook and talk about which linebacker plays the hook on which sort of personnel. There's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle where we can talk about different defenses and how different they are and why that I'm not sure the NFL does a brilliant job of. So have a read at that, and I think you'll like it.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely go check out the defensive handbook by Tom. He's doing it every year, and it's your pinned tweet on your Twitter as well, right? So definitely go check that out. I appreciate it again. As for me, all my written work can be found on pff.com. I'm just going to start the breakout pieces this week, beginning with quarterbacks, running backs, and linebackers. And then you can catch me weekly on the PFF Fantasy Podcast with Nathan Yonke talking offense. If you haven't checked that out or subscribed to that brand new YouTube channel, please do. I would greatly appreciate that. And then you can find me here in the IDP show feed every other week talking IDP. And that includes an upcoming episode in a couple weeks with another DLFer hailing from the United Kingdom. Mr. Jace Abbey will be joining me to talk IDP breakouts for the 2023 season. So you won't want to miss that. So until then, IDP's out.